Think about the biggest pop culture franchises. Usually they sell aspirational fantasies of wealth, destiny, or technological perfection. But the X-Men built an empire on a darker premise. Behind the colorful costumes and mutant abilities lies a story rooted in societal marginalization. This property has generated over $6 billion at the global box office across more than a dozen films. It remains a dominant force in modern entertainment. This diagram shows the defining mechanic of the franchise, the X gene. Unlike Spider-Man or Iron Man, who acquired their abilities through scientific accidents or high-tech armor, mutants are born this way. It is an inherent biological trait that causes the very society they protect to fear them. That persistent fear is the actual engine of the franchise. Their 60-year popularity endures because their mutant status acts as a flexible allegory for real-world civil rights struggles. The concept started in 1963 with writer Stan Lee and artist Jack Kirby. Both were Jewish artists from working-class New York neighborhoods, navigating a mid-century American culture that often demanded outward conformity. The original roster consisted of 5 characters who presented as middle-class white Americans, yet possessed a genetic status that made them other. This created a specific tension, the ability to pass in the mainstream while harboring an identity that would trigger immediate exclusion if revealed. This mirrored the social navigation required for Jewish American assimilation in the early 1960s. But the original comic struggled. Lee and Kirby focused mostly on generic teenage interpersonal drama. Without clear socio-political stakes, readership plummeted. By 1970, Marvel canceled the news stories entirely, relegating the title to a reprint book. Survival in the changing marketplace required the writers to trade subtle subtext for an intentional engagement with political protest. Writer Chris Claremont took over the series in 1975. His first major move was dissolving the localized, homogenous team and recruiting a diverse international cast from Kenya, Germany, the Soviet Union, and the Apache Nation. He codified a new ideological axis for the franchise by centering the narrative on a debate over minority survival between Professor Charles Xavier and Magneto. Xavier argued for peaceful integration, respectability politics, and coexistence with a hostile human majority. His stance drew from the philosophies of mainstream civil rights leaders of the era. Magneto took the opposing view. Drawing from mid-century radical activism, he believed humanity would inevitably resort to violence against mutants, requiring preemptive self-defense and absolute separatist sovereignty. Claremont gave Magneto's extremism a deeply empathetic origin by revealing him as a Holocaust survivor. His radical tactics were rooted in a desperate vow of never again. By anchoring the science fiction action to these recognizable, competing human rights philosophies, Claremont turned a failing comic into a commercial powerhouse. The effectiveness of the allegory depends on a clear depiction of the machinery used to enforce prejudice. The villains evolved to meet this need. The Sentinels, giant mutant hunting robots, functioned as direct stand-ins for state-sanctioned violence and institutional racial profiling. During the 1980s and 90s, the writers expanded the scope. The narrative confronted religious extremism and homophobia, mirroring the rise of the religious right in American politics. Marvel introduced the legacy virus, a storyline explicitly paralleling the contemporary HIV/AIDS epidemic and highlighting society's apathy toward marginalized health crises. The X-Men universe had become a flexible sociological blueprint, capable of reflecting almost any group facing systemic persecution. In 2019, writer Jonathan Hickman launched the Krakoan era, which posed a structural question. What happens to the civil rights metaphor when the oppressed win? The mutants abandoned Xavier's dream of integration. Instead, they established Krakoa, an isolationist ethno-state, using newly developed pharmaceuticals to exert economic leverage over human nations. This flowchart illustrates their ultimate advantage, the resurrection protocols. Using advanced biotechnology, mutants cured death and eliminated their own physical vulnerability. Scholars noted the shift. By removing their vulnerability and operating outside global legal accountability, mutants transitioned from an underclass into a post-human political elite. This exposed a structural flaw. The X-Men allegory collapses when they hold all the cards. The narrative only functions when it is tethered to real-world marginalized vulnerability. Recognizing this collapse, Marvel initiated an editorial reset in 2024 titled From the Ashes. They dismantled the Krakoan sovereign state to rescue the underlying allegory. The mutants are now geographically fractured into decentralized grassroots hubs. This forces the characters back into daily friction with an antagonistic human majority. This return to localized community defense aligns with the actual history of civil rights movements. Progress is rarely linear, and grassroots resistance remains a requirement. The X-Men survive because they reflected difficult truth. The fight against systemic bigotry is not solved by achieving absolute technological supremacy or isolationism. It requires the relentless pursuit